Have you ever crossed a line you thought you would never cross? I never imagined I would. Yet, life has a strange way of testing our limits and leading us to unexpected places. At 46, my husband and I live in a small town, where our lives were pleasant and predictable until we bought a property by the lake 2 years ago, hoping it would be our personal slice of paradise. Our aim was to find a peaceful hideaway where we could get away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life, a place where we could unwind and simply take pleasure in the more straightforward aspects of life. When the chance presented itself to purchase an old and quaint cottage on the sea, we did not hesitate to take advantage of it. Although it was in need of some improvement, we recognized potential in it. With a few changes, it turned out to be the warm and inviting retreat that we had always envisioned. That is what we believed. But as with all things in life, it wasn't as easy as we'd hoped. The first sign of trouble came with the utilities. The house had been empty for years, and during that time, someone had damaged the electrical wires connecting the house to the power pole. Not just that, the wires to the neighboring house were cut too. It was a mess, and we were stuck without power. I tried everything I could think of, called the local management company, but they were no help. They didn't have the materials, the manpower, or the interest in solving our problem. Weeks turned into a month, and my frustration grew. I remember venting to my daughter one day, not expecting anything to come of it, but she suggested something that I hadn't considered. "Why don't you ask Michael?" she said, talking about my son-in-law. He was an electrician, though not working as one at the time. He was doing odd jobs around town, a bit of everything really. I hadn't thought of it before, but it seemed like a good idea. So, that same day, I went to see Michael. He was at his job at the local administration building, and when I got there, I asked the security guard where I could find him. He pointed me to his office, and when I walked in, there he was, Michael, my son-in-law. He's 27, tall, handsome, and fit, the kind of guy who always has a confident smile on his face. I explained the situation to him, and he listened closely, his eyes thoughtful. "Don't worry, I'll take care of it," he said, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. He had that look in his eyes though, like he was seeing me in a way that no one had in a long time. It made me feel good. I hadn't felt that way in years, and I couldn't help but notice. The next day, as I was pulling into the driveway, I saw Michael up on the power pole, working to fix the wires. He was focused, determined, and watching him work gave me a strange sense of comfort. By the time I got into the house, the power was back on. I flicked the light switch, and there it was. The warm glow of the lights filled the room, and I couldn't help but smile. Michael came in a few minutes later, a playful grin on his face. "So, mother-in-law, the power's back on. Where's my payment?" he teased, his voice light and joking. I laughed, feeling a little flustered. "Right away, Michael. I'll take care of everything," I replied. I set out some food, and as we sat down, Michael asked where my husband was. "He's over at his mother's place helping her out," I said, which meant it was just me and Michael for the evening. He nodded, that same playful smile still on his face. "That's fine. We'll have a nice evening together," he said, his tone casual, but there was something in his eyes that made me pause. There was a moment of silence, and I couldn't help but wonder what he was thinking. "Am I only feeding you, or do I still owe you money?" I asked, half joking, trying to keep things light. No, mother-in-law," he said quickly, "everything is on a free basis." "Free?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. And then it hit me, the way he was looking at me, the way he had been all evening. "Michael, are you suggesting you want something more?" He didn't say anything, just poured us both a glass of whiskey and motioned for me to sit closer. "Let's sort things out," he said, his voice low and steady. In that moment, I knew where this was heading. I wasn't shocked, not really. My husband had his own indiscretions over the years, something I'd chosen to ignore. Maybe it was loneliness, or maybe it was the need to feel desired again, but whatever it was, I didn't stop it. I let it happen. That night, Michael and I crossed a line. We moved from the dining table to the bedroom, and as wrong as it was, there was no turning back. It wasn't just a one-time thing either. What started that night turned into something much more, a secret affair that took on a life of its own. In the weeks that followed, we found ourselves drawn to each other more and more. Michael would come by when my husband was away, and we'd steal moments together. Sometimes, he'd pick me up after work, and we'd drive out to the lake, find a quiet spot, and just be together. There was an intensity between us, a connection that I hadn't felt in years. But with every stolen moment, the weight of what we were doing grew heavier. I started to feel the guilt gnawing at me, but at the same time, I couldn't stop. My husband noticed the changes, how distracted I was, how often I'd be gone without a real explanation. He asked questions, but I always had an excuse ready, even though deep down, I knew I was only fooling myself. One night, after another one of our secret meetings, Michael and I sat by the lake, the moonlight reflecting off the water. There was a tension in the air, something unspoken hanging between us. Finally, Michael broke the silence. "Do you ever think about where this is going?" I didn't know what to say. Of course, I'd thought about it every day. But the truth was, I didn't have an answer. "I don't know," I admitted quietly. "I don't know what happens next." Michael looked at me, his expression serious. "I care about you a lot. But we can't keep doing this forever." He was right. We both knew it. But knowing and doing are two different things. The thrill of our secret, the intensity of our connection. It was addictive. But it couldn't last. And deep down, we both knew that. A few weeks later, it all came crashing down. My husband confronted me, his suspicions finally getting the best of him. He demanded the truth, and for the first time, I couldn't lie. I confessed everything, about the affair, about Michael, about how it all started. I expected anger, expected him to throw me out, but instead, he just looked at me with a sadness that cut deeper than any words could. After that, things between Michael and me fell apart. We both knew it was over. It had to be. Michael moved on with his life, and I tried to pick up the pieces of mine. My marriage was shattered, and even though my husband and I stayed together, things were never the same. I spent a long time trying to figure out why it happened, trying to make sense of it all. Was it loneliness? Boredom? The need to feel desired? Maybe it was all of those things. But what I realized in the end was that I had been searching for something that I couldn't find in anyone else. It wasn't about Michael or my husband or the thrill of the affair. It was about me, and the emptiness I felt inside. Over time, I've managed to rebuild my life. My husband and I worked through our issues, and though our marriage will never be what it once was, we found a way to move forward. But the scars of that time remain, and every now and then, when I sit by the lake, I'm reminded of the choices I made and the line I crossed. And now, I can't help but wonder, what would you do if you found yourself at that same crossroads? Would you give in to temptation, or would you walk away? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you crossed a line you never thought you would? How did you deal with it? Let me know. I'd love to hear your stories.